Today I'm going to be talking about healthcare for women in the 21st century. We should say natural healthcare for women in the 21st century. Women today suffer from many health problems. PMS, anorexia affects women more than men, which is an eating disorder. Polycystic ovary syndrome. Two more serious problems like certain kinds of cancers, ovarian cancer, breast cancer. And I'm going to talk about some solutions to these things that are based on an old understanding from Eastern medicine, along with some new understanding of how the body is affected by our modern situations that we're in. So we're going to be focusing on a few different problems just because of the shortness of our time, and we can focus on three problems. We'll focus on breast cancer, which affects 1 out of 8 women in their lifetime in the U.S. We'll talk about also osteoporosis, which affects men 10 years after women, but women first, after menopause. And then we'll be talking about depression, which affects women much more than men. Although men get depressed also, it affects much more women. And there's reasons for that. So we'll talk about, in order to understand this, we'll talk about it from a larger perspective. My orientation is coming from what I call a full-spectrum macrobiotic approach. It's a little different than what people read about in the books as a macrobiotic approach. Macrobiotic approach for many people is known as a do's and don't of diet, primarily a vegan diet, fasting diet, which can have remarkable effects for the right person, for the right time. But the bigger meaning of macrobiotic means a larger view or perspective. It actually means the way of longevity. Macrobiotics means the way of longevity. And so from a larger macrobiotic view, we can understand some really interesting insights from traditional Oriental medicines. People know about traditional Chinese medicine. And traditional Chinese medicine, what's called TCM, is officially sanctioned Chinese medicine of the communist government. Cue the music. But another phrase has been used by some writer, and it's called TOM, which is traditional Oriental medicines. So traditional Oriental medicine includes the ancient medicine that came from China pre-communism, and that's also starting to be revived and trying to be understood by people, as well as you might say the variations of the Chinese medicine that spread throughout Asia and mixed with folk traditions, but still came from the same understanding as the original Chinese medicine pre-communism. So that spread to Korea, spread to Japan, spread to Malaysia, and spread to surrounding countries, so including Vietnam. And so these mixed with their folk traditions and folk wisdoms, but they did have a common understanding, and the common understanding is the philosophy of balance. And this is something that, since learning about this 40 years ago and teaching and counseling thousands of people, I've always used as a guide to try to understand anything about health. And many things about life I've got insights into by using that understanding. It's a very, very useful, what I could call a universal understanding. In fact, someone just reminded me, giving me a book gift of Alan Watts, about Alan Watts, the author and philosopher and many other names, some we can't use in polite conversation. But Alan Watts was a real pioneer in introducing Eastern understanding, and his book was the first book that introduced me to start to understand Eastern things, called The Way of Zen. He also wrote a book that shows the universality of the principle of balance, and it's called The Two Hands of God. So the understanding of opposites in life and the balance of opposites is something that's very universal, east, west, north, and south, in many of the folk traditions and religions and philosophies that are taught. So that understanding women's health, the nature, the insights in the Orient, they had deep insights into women's body and men's bodies, and how they classified that a woman's body is ruled by what they called blood, which was their name for yin, substance and blood. A man's body is ruled by energy. So problems that women first have, and even serious problems, are related to an imbalance between blood and energy. So, you also may say another way of understanding that, a version of yin and yang, is activity and rest. So that a woman has to nourish her blood to stay healthy, and a man has to nourish his energy. So a woman's energy is more internal, slower moving, more quiet inside, and needs to nourish that to stay healthy. And a man's energy is more out to the surface to a certain extent. He has to nourish that external energy. That's why men develop more muscles. Their metabolism tends to be a little bit higher, warmer, so they have a natural activity, which is energy. And so a man usually gets into problems from energy, women gets into problems from blood. So many health problems are related to imbalances, and the major health problems today is, for both men and women, but particularly since we're talking about women today, is coming from diet, lifestyle, and environment. So diet and lifestyle, we have lost the understanding of how to eat. As the traditional cultures around the world and all longevity cultures have a similar way of eating, if you know how to interpret that. They had variations for their environments that they lived in. But now, we don't understand that as much, so then we try to eat in northern New England the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean is a warm place. It has many good foods, and it doesn't mean you can't make some of those foods, but Mediterranean diet would not be exactly suitable for people living in New England because it gets colder here. Or people will want to eat the prehistoric diet, and they say we should eat like the Eskimos. Well, there's a reason that Eskimos ate like Eskimos, or Inuit, the traditional name, is because it was very cold and nothing grew there. And now if they try to eat like that, there's a lot of problems because there's some pollution in even natural animal foods if they try to live on natural animal foods. But they don't live the same lifestyles as they have. They don't go out fishing in the Arctic weather as much as they used to, but they do have they have the parkas that are more synthetic and keep you very warm. So their conditions are quite different than it used to be. So also, or we come up with ideas that can have some healthfulness to them, like we say we should all eat vegetarian. Well, cultures that were mostly vegetarian were in hot climates because a vegetarian diet is naturally cooling. If you eat a vegetarian diet and you try to put out a lot of energy, or you try to build with your blood with it, it can be done, but it can be difficult in modern society with a very active lifestyle. Especially in a climate that's more cold or that gets cold. So, or we come up with ideas that we should eat like prehistoric people. And it's always, I've mentioned this before, that it's a bit funny when people eat a prehistoric diet and that prehistoric diet that prehistoric meal has wild salmon, and then it has sweet potatoes, and then it has kale, and then it has almond milk, and it finishes with chocolate. So wondering which prehistoric group ate those meals. But no carbs, right? No carbs, except maybe a little sweet potato. That's because people are thought to have eaten some tubers in the past who are prehistoric. But there's quite a bit of evidence that we've actually adapted to eating grains and vegetables and other foods. So basically, in diet, the diet that traditionally they understood and the longevity cultures ate was something in China, ancient China, they called a clear light diet. So a clear light diet centers around cooked grains and vegetables, moderate but regular amounts of animal food of varying types depending on your body and condition. It consisted of moderation in concentrated foods like fats and sweeteners and sugars and, of course, alcohol. And of course, it had nothing like we have, like chemicals and additives and preservatives and pesticides that didn't exist. And the reason why this diet was recommended and going against this diet for women hurts their health problems is because basically the way they explain it is in naturalistic terms. Our body is like a stove. Our body has a stove and it has a cooking pot. So the cooking pot is considered the stomach. And the stove is basically the pancreatic enzymes from a modern sense, and part of the stove is maybe the small intestine. So what happens is that because our body is a warm process, then they recommend primarily cooked food. Now, there's another reason for cooked food that's from a modern sense, is that we don't have a rumen. So a rumen is a stomach that has bacteria. Cow has 4 of them. So then when we eat a lot of raw foods, we don't really digest it. There's another aspect of raw food is naturally raw foods are cooling to the body. So it cools down the body and cools down the function of the body, and this can lead to what's called an underactive cold condition that weakens your immune system, weakens your blood, weakens your digestion, weakens the whole overall function of the body. If you weaken that over a long period of time, say eating a lot of stimulating foods that cool you, in large amounts, things like sugar will cool you down, stimulants like coffee, even alcohol will cool you down, and because they stimulate the body, and they're also very concentrated with nutrition, so they weaken your digestion. So basically, eating cooked food, that's why cooked food is traditional around the world, primarily cooked food with small amounts of raw here and there. Like raw fruit was eaten more in hot climates than cold climates. Then also, part of that is that we have to be careful that we say you are what you eat, but the traditional understanding, which I found in my experience over counseling many thousands of people is absolutely true, is you are what you digest. That's the other part of it. You are what you eat, but you are what you digest. So basically, if you put too much rich food into your body, it starts to weaken your digestion. First, it overworks your digestion, creating something what they call heat and dampness. If you translate that into modern terms, it's basically inflammation in the digestive tract and congestion. That's what dampness and heat is. And there's signs of this in Oriental medicine and diagnosis that I use in my diagnosis to see that there's heat and dampness inside the digestive tract. So overly rich foods would be things like flour, fatty meats, overeating fats, overeating sugar, and of course, if you mix those together, we have a nice donut, right? Even eating a lot of donuts, you don't have to eat a lot of them to overeat because it's a rich food. Concentrated sauces like tomato sauce is considered overly rich. Concentrated juices are very rich, so if we overdrink them or overtake them, weakens digestion. And then on top of this, we have also, so these are some of the food understanding that we, of course, if you look around how people eat today, the most number one food in America is pizza. It doesn't mean that you can never eat pizza, but people overeat pizza, their digestion gets weak. Or people overeat commercial hamburgers, which are high in fat. Or people overeat poor quality fats. Some people overeat good quality fats. Some people overeat poor quality fats like vegetable oils, which has its own effect, but it also weakens digestion. So if you look at the average modern diet, people overeat flour products. They overeat fats, usually poor quality. They overeat sugars. In natural diets, sometimes we do the opposite because if you don't get enough nutrition, then you have a weakness. The body also gets weak because it doesn't have enough energy to function. It can't build the body up. So people on like raw foods diets, vegetarian diets, they missing nutrients that build the blood for women particularly. People on also low carb diets, they also have an imbalance because of that and with low carb diets. So then it's easy to see, even in health regimens, people do things that will weaken their body. Now, in diet, so carbohydrates, basically people need varying degrees of carbohydrates in their diet, especially, starchy carbohydrates like grains and some tubers. Tubers, though, tend to be more cooling in their effect, even though they were started to be eaten, like potatoes and sweet potatoes, because they originally have a tropical nature, although they were hybridized, especially potatoes, to eat in Eastern Europe. If overeating, they can cool the body down and slow the metabolism. So all kinds of grains can include brown rice, white rice, millet, barley, whole grain noodles. If white rice is eaten, it's best to be organic. If some white flour is eaten, which is much more concentrated, flour products are much more concentrated, so it's better to be moderate, then basically it's best to get ones that are without iron. The iron tends to have a damaging effect on the body if eaten too much. So people ate various kinds of grains, depending. Now we have in a temperate zone like this, we can have a variety of grains, and generally grains are much more energizing. So if you're physically active, you can eat more of them. If you're less physically active, you still need them just about every meal, but generally you can have 1/3 of volume of your meals, grains, unless you had really severe deficiency and just have to up your calories. If you're putting out a lot of energy, up to half grains can be used. Men generally need more grains because they need more calories. Grains are calorie rich. Women need less, and women tend to need less of the concentrated grains because they're too energizing, like flour products. Then also, various kinds of protein-rich foods are important to build the blood. For women, they tend to be better emphasizing a little bit lighter proteins, things like fish, if not vegetarian, naturally raised wild fish, chicken, and some meats, some eggs, some dairy products on a regular basis. And of course, this depends on your condition. Some people, because of their condition being very weak, they may need something strong like liver or organ meats or more red meats to build their blood up if they've been severely weakened by poor diet or a modern diet that weakened their digestion or many kinds of natural diets. So certain kinds of proteins, blood-building foods women need, and without some kind of blood-building foods on a regular basis, then a woman's body starts to become imbalanced. Now the interesting thing about that is that beans don't necessarily have effect like blood building. Some have a moderate blood building effect, like something like black beans or black soybeans, and they were used traditionally for that. But the key factor with things like beans is people in hot climates would eat more beans because they slow the metabolism, they cool you down, and people in cold climates would eat less beans. That's why when you go to Oriental countries, they eat a little bit of red bean, a zuki bean. They eat a little bit of the black soybean, but they don't eat a lot of them, only a few times a week in colder places, like in China and Japan. But in hot places like Mexico and South America, then beans are more of a staple, and as long as the rest of the diet is balanced, it balances the environment. So the protein-rich building foods are really important. Now, with this, it's very interesting that organ meats and red meat is considered to have, in interesting that I've discovered is true from my experience of counseling many people, have a double nature. It builds blood, so it has this blood building effect, but it also is super energizing of all foods, so that many women could get in trouble if they overeat those foods. I don't think there's any danger of modern people overeating liver. It's not a very common food anymore. So small amounts of that can be very good for blood building, especially if someone's been on weakening diets, which a lot of sugar and empty foods. And also if women have been on weakened, they could use red meat, but if overeating red meat, then it could overactivate the body too much and start to affect the blood and the flow of energy in the body. Now also, in addition, vegetables, we talked about cooked vegetables as a primary quality, moderate amount of fats, and fruits depending on the person's condition and climate. Fruits are naturally cooling, so that if a lot of fruits are eaten, the body becomes cold and weak. It slows down the body function, the metabolism. But if cooked fruits do that less, raw fruits do that more, tropical fruits are more cooling. So these are factors. Now, in lifestyle, there are many lifestyle factors that weakens women's health. One of them is irregularity in lifestyle and an overactive lifestyle, where a person is overactive, working too much, thinking too much. In other words, modern living. So modern living is one factor in lifestyle because it tends to be extremely active, which weakens the body. Especially a woman's body, it'll weaken overactivity, and also becomes irregular. The woman's body seems to like cycles, has something to do with menstruation. So cyclically eating regularly, sleeping regularly, regular activities, a certain amount of rest and relaxation is very important for a woman's health. And of course, this is the opposite of what happens today, because women are working and then go home, and many women in a family are taking care of the family, doing most of the chores, doing the dishes, taking care of the kids, and so it's easy to see why we get in trouble. In lifestyle, we're exposed. If we don't sleep, we start to burn out the body also and weaken the body. And what happens is that there is an equation that the energy and nutrition you get from food has to be balanced by the energy and nutrition that you are using up. And if the activities are too much, or the nutrition is not enough to build the blood and energy, then the equation becomes imbalanced, and you start to borrow from your energy savings account. In traditional Oriental medicine from China, they call this your Jing. In Ayurvedic medicine, they call it your Ojas. It's the constitutional energy. They also call it your original energy, Yuan Qi in Chinese, your original energy. And you start to borrow from that. And in a modern sense, that is, you start to make your adrenals overfunction because you're not getting enough energy from food, or you're putting out more energy than you can have from food and activity and rest and sleep. And what happens is then you start to dip upon, it's your energy savings account. What you eat, how you live, is your energy bank account. And when that is not enough, or if too much is expended, right, you buy too many things, then you have to start to dip into your savings account. And that's your constitutional energy, related to what we call the endocrine system. So it starts to affect your adrenals, starts to affect your thyroid, starts to pull out. And this is when serious disease, so depression for women, who are much more affected than men, is a functional disease, in that the function of the nervous system is affected in common depression, then becomes serious, it starts to go deeper in the body. Osteoporosis, the disease of the bones, is where now you're starting to actually withdraw. The bones are considered part of the kidney energy system in Oriental medicine. Kidney energy is really kidney adrenal. And the bones are basically the major storehouse of energy. That's why there are many energy practices in China that build your bone and make it more dense and strong. And as the bone becomes more dense and strong, the overall health becomes stronger. You start to restore your energy. And when doing energy practices, of course, the first things that are restored, though, is digestion and lung function, because that's the main place we're getting energy from in our day-to-day life. So that basically our lifestyle will affect us that way. And then we start to dip deeper into the body. Cancers also means that you've really depleted your kidney energy and started to deplete the body, and we'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, we're also exposed to a lot of toxins, and these toxins have to be processed by the body. And guess what happens when you have to process all the toxins from electromagnetic fields, from air pollution, from water pollution, from food pollution, from people pollution? Now, you know some of those people, right? So then what happens is we have to use up a lot of energy. And so there's an ancient Taoist teachings, were deeper philosophy from ancient China. They say Taoism came before Chinese civilization, but it's central to it. And an ancient Taoist expression is that if you want to preserve your life energy, don't talk too much. Don't think too much. Don't do too much. Of course, if you don't think and you don't do, life's pretty boring. So our to experience life and grow our awareness and consciousness, we have to have experiences. But the key is how much experiences. In the day of constant MP3 players and constant Twitter and constant Facebook, and now watching TV on the phone all the time, it's easy to get overstimulated and weakened. And so when this happens, what the interesting happens is, first, this affects the functional energy in the body. It affects your digestion. If the food is not right, your lifestyle is excessive or not supportive of your body, toxins are expending energy. First, your digestion gets affected, then your lung function goes down. And as the lung function goes down, your immune function goes down. in Oriental medicine, they made the connection between lungs and immunity, and that's why all these breathing exercises have been found to be healing, from Qigong and meditation and yoga, because when the lung function goes down, the immune system goes down. Now, there may be a functional reason that some people talk about, and that is when the body is under stress, which means the energy equation is off, right? Not enough is coming in, not enough nutrients or energy is coming in, or too much is going out. Then what happens, the body goes into stress mode, and what happens in the stress mode, it starts to create hormonal imbalances in the body. And one of the hormonal imbalances that occurs is that the estrogen levels in the body start going up. And when they go up, your immune function goes down. And so if someone's overweight, they have a double whammy, because the fat cells are also producing estrogen, and then the stress body is producing estrogen, is also producing estrogen, so the body starts to get depressed in the function. And this starts to harden tissues in the body. And one of the places that starts to, there's a good stress and a bad stress. So this Hans Selye, who coined the term stress, which he regretted, I heard. He regretted coining the term stress, because stress can be good. You learn something new, it's stressful. But yet it's exciting. So he really wished he made the term strain, because it's really strain that causes a problem, which means the energy equation is off. Something is, you can't handle, you don't have enough energy to handle something. And so then it starts to make imbalances. And one of the imbalances, according to body pioneer Thomas Hanna, is that the body starts to collapse. And one of the collapsing places that collapses very easily is the front of the body. He called this the red light reflex. Thomas Hanna, if you want to read, he has two books called The Body of Life, and the second book is called Somatics. Unfortunately, he passed away. He had a car accident in his almost 70. He had a car accident. And he wrote about, that aging doesn't have to be a bad thing. But at 70, he was in very good health and very flexible and very energetic. It would have been interesting to see him at 90, what he could do with that, with his ideas of doing that. But in Qigong, they had the same understanding, is that they have many things to reverse the aging of the body. So like you see elderly people, often they're collapsed, which means the lung is collapsing. Now, there's always an interaction with something I call in my diagnosis your constitution. So that's the reason why you see someone whose body is collapsing, and it's all out of balance, and it's all blocked and tense, and they're still healthy. They don't have cancer. They don't have heart disease. They're starting to lose their eyesight and having other problems, but they don't have serious disease, because in the Oriental medicine idea, which I based my diagnosis on, they have a very strong constitutional energy, which means very strong adrenals, very strong digestion, very strong lungs, so they can handle stresses compared to another person. Ironically, many of them actually end up eating pretty sensibly. Even though they might not be eating organic, they have regular meals, they eat grains, they eat vegetables, they eat animal food, they don't eat much sugar. This is the way my relatives who made it into their 90s ate. Dessert was something you had a little bit of. They wouldn't eat excessive amounts of fat because they were worried about weight, being overweight by eating too many calories. So they were very moderate in their approach, which is very similar to what traditional people around the world. Nobody ate a really high-fat diet around the world unless you were living in a very cold place, like the Inuit. So they were very moderate with their diet that way. So now breast cancer is a big thing, and it comes from, you might say, a perfect storm. The diet, poor diet for many, many years, lifestyle. There's certain key factors in diet where people run on lots of stimulants like coffee, sugar, and also a very interesting stimulant that is a depressant, polyunsaturated fats, particularly rancid polyunsaturated fats many people are eating. These are the vegetable oils that are in all the foods. And vegetable oil consumption has gone up through the roof over the last 50 years. So this combination of factors, along with lifestyle factors that burn out the body, start to depress and weaken the body, so the immune function goes down. It's estimated that I remember when I was surprised to read this many years ago by one of the vegetarian authors. He talked about how it's estimated that breast cancer takes anywhere from 20 to 40 years before it can be detected by medicine. Now, there are new methods that can detect it earlier, but that was a long time ago. So that's in the body for a long time. And in fact, there's some evidence that people have cancer cells in their body all the time, and you just knock them out. They come out, you knock them out, they come out, you knock them out. But what happens in something like full-blown breast cancer, when it goes to that stage, then what happens is basically the immune system is so weak that it can't keep the cancer cells at bay. And so because of this, we have 246,000 new cases of invasive breast cancers, which sometimes is a bit of a misnomer, especially for one type of breast cancer called ductal carcinoma, in situ carcinoma. It's a precancerous condition that is treated as cancer. And here's a very interesting thing. Well, it's actually a disturbing thing, is that most of the cancer survival rates in breast cancer seem to be for that type of cancer in medicine. So that when they say we have success at cancer, it's this kind of cancer that's microscopic in the duct that 90% never becomes cancer, but they treat it aggressively like a cancer, and then that becomes the success story. Success means also survival of 5 years. So there's a great exaggeration in cancer success rates in medicine because of statistical manipulation and things like this. Also, same thing with prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is now being treated even when it's not cancer, and then it's successfully said it is cancer. Prostate cancer, one researcher did some research on men who died of other causes, and he did autopsies, and he found that many of the men had prostate cancer. It just never did anything to them. They kept it at bay enough so it didn't, but they died of something else, not the prostate cancer. So there's a lot of over-treatment of these cancers, and there's a lot of statistics that are exaggerated in cancer. So the major cause of this, one major stressor besides all the other stressors, irregular lifestyle, working too hard, putting out too much energy, and then the immune energy in Oriental medicine is a very interesting thing. They say this is the most active energy in the body. It's an outgrowth of your digestive function, your energy function, your lung function. So the immune system is this more aggressive energy that comes out of your whole body energy. So when your body energy is depressed, immune function goes down. When it gets depressed over many, many years, cancers start to arise. So a major stressor for the breast is radiation, those yearly mammograms. And this has actually been found. In fact, the book that documented this from many years ago is online. It was done by a doctor, and you can get that book on radiation linked to breast cancer. It's still current, but you can't get that book anywhere else. It's not available at Amazon or bookstores, which you would think it is. So still women going for their annual mammogram, exposing their breast to radiation, which is a major contributor to the breast cancer. So basically, for preventing breast cancer and possible to recover from breast cancer is you have to get the body original energy strong again, because so you have to work on digestion, you have to work on lung function, you have to work on lifestyle, you have to make sure the food is digestible. So for the person's condition, when I work with people, and I've worked with a lot of women, some women who are survivors many, many years with breast cancer and other cancers, far beyond 5 years, 10 years and 15 years, then basically I individually gear their diet because, for instance, some person may have excess, and I've seen women with breast cancer. I've seen a lot of women over the years with breast cancer. Some were overweight, but half were skinny. Half were overweight, half were skinny, and half were so malnourished and weakened in blood that when you shook their hand, there was a common thing I started to see in the women who are thin with breast cancer. Unfortunately, I called it the claw hand. Their hand was so thin, which is a sign that they were so malnourished. And then what happens is the body starts to get stressed and starts to collapse the breast area. and this area becomes congested and blocked, and no blood is circulating there, no immune cells are circulating there, the cancer arises. So along with working on the person, working on many people, like for instance, inflammatory breast cancer is a more hot condition, so you have to do things to get the body out of the heated condition. There's two types of heated condition, and this is something I'll look at when I see people, either deficiency heat or pure excess of heat. Pure excess of heat comes from eating lots of overly rich fats and animal foods, along with sugars and flour. Deficiency comes from many, many different causes of weakened digestion, either from natural eating or modern eating that weakens digestion. So you have to look at the condition to help a person. But definitely prevention you can be done. Now the body has to be reversed physically. I do this two ways. One, I do it with a certain kind of massage and acupressure. The acupressure points are key places in the muscles that release the tension in areas of the body. So the tension has to be released, and the breast is related to a meridian or energy pathway called the liver. That has to be released for women with breast cancer, the liver meridian, and it goes up through the front of the body, so often these muscles have to be released. You could use the somatic exercises, but I also use various kinds of Qigong exercises to help a person release that. Sometimes herbs are necessary. There's very good Chinese herbal formulas to reverse. Sometimes supplements are needed to reverse deficiencies. And also depending on what a person needs or desire. If someone wants to be vegan and heal, to build the blood, you'd have to use some kind of nutrition, herbs, diet, very specially designed to help a person. Now, osteoporosis is a condition that many women get in America. And basically, the interesting thing, when estrogen therapy was highly in use from 1972 to 1994, it was linked both to breast cancer rates and osteoporosis rates seemed to go up at the same time when they gave estrogen therapy. And now it's actually come back again, but the estrogen, when given in this, is a stressor. It's giving more of a stress hormone to women, so it puts the body more into stress that it's already stressed by diet, by lifestyle, by environment. So osteoporosis is an interesting thing. From an energetic view, it means that now the body has been weakened on a deeper level. So it's not just an issue of taking nutrients, which can be useful to build the bones, like vitamin A and D and K. These nutrients are very hardy nutrients that strengthen the body on a deep level. And foods that have them tend to be very strengthening, like foods like egg yolks and organ meats and fish, certain kinds of cod livers or liver oils, and also and some dairy food from naturally raised animals, especially concentrated ones like cheese. These tend to be very strengthening types of foods that will build the bones, because the bones need very strong building nutrient-rich foods. So along with grains and vegetables, some natural animal foods are needed, but the key factor is, though, how strong a person is at digestion. Because many women who develop osteoporosis have years of weakening their digestion, either by a poor diet, an excessive diet, a too rich diet, a diet that didn't have enough nutrients to help the digestive system, and then you have to work first on their digestion. So there's some herbal formulas from China that are good for digestion. Some people need digestive aids to help. And then these richer foods that build the body on a deep level have to be introduced in small amounts, because the person can't digest them at first, many people who have osteoporosis. Because again, the idea here is it's not just an issue of the bones. From a mechanical view, we say bones, calcium, bones, vitamin A, or bones. Yes, it's true, there's something related to that. But on another level, the body has been weakened on a very deep level, and the body is starting to try to pull energy out of the bones to function. It's one of the deepest withdrawals of your energy savings account. So then you have to work on digestion, you have to work on respiration, there are, interesting enough, some really bone-building exercises, not weight training. in Qigong. Yesterday I did a class in Qigong nearby, and in the class I was doing an exercise that's from a system called the 5 Animal Frolics. And one of the exercises was called the bear. And in this bear exercise, you stand with a wide ratio between your arms, and you move slowly and deeply from side to side. And what this does, it actually strengthens the kidney energy. The interesting thing is when I do this in class, I'll have people do another exercise from the 5 Animal Frolics called the crane and walk around a little bit, and they feel lighter after that. And then I say, let's do the bear. Now, we do the bear for a while and then walk around and you feel really heavy. The bones need to be dense, but because of poor diet, in Oriental medicine, the bones are considered an outgrowth of the blood. So when the blood or nourishment is as strong, the bones is strong. But I've used this analogy before of a candle. The substance of the body is like the wax or wick of the candle, and the heat of the candle is like the energy moving through the body. If the energy is stronger put out than coming in, then you start to withdraw energy from your bones, and it starts to weaken the bones. So the process, my microbiotic understanding of treating the bones is actually to strengthen the whole body. Now, the interesting thing is that bones, one of the reasons that Qigong is renowned for strengthening the bones and Tai Chi is because there's a link between higher carbon dioxide levels in your body and the bone strength. And so when you do deep breathing, I used to think when you did deep breathing that you got more oxygen in your system. But when you do very deep breathing, and I had met somebody who my teacher had checked, and there's a breathing practice in Qigong where you do deep abdominal breathing. And this man happened to be doing yoga since he was 17 and breathing exercises. And when he learned about the Qigong breathing, he started doing this, and he was in his 40s. And he was able to do, and one of my teachers at that time, which was an ethical man, the man was able to do an 8-minute breath. That means 4 minutes in, 4 minutes out. And this is renowned, they talk about this, they call it turtle breathing in the Qigong tradition. And I took many of the breathing classes by the teacher who he studied with, and I took other classes on Qigong with him, and it was interesting because we would do this longer breathing, and as we were doing the breathing, we'd go deeper and deeper. And then I realized that it wasn't oxygen that we were building up. It was actually carbon dioxide. And that's also the benefit of people living in the mountains who tend to have denser bones, because they think it's because of the mineral-rich soil, which is probably, but it also is being in the environment of the mountains, they also have more carbon dioxide, which builds the bones. And this may be one of the technical reasons why Qigong exercises with very long breathing. Recently, I renewed some of my Qigong practices and started to do some different practices. And then I started to realize I happened to be practicing downstairs in my house where there's a clock with a loud second hand. And so then I started to realize that my breath I was going much too fast, because the tick of the clock was tick, tick, tick. And when I started to do that breathing with the exercise, then I started to feel something very different. So that's one of the things that can help osteoporosis. A nourishing diet that has moderate amounts of calcium, doesn't have to be high calcium. It seems to be foods that have things like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K are even more important, along with grains and cooked vegetables. Now, anything that dissipates energy has to be curtailed. So a lot of people don't realize this dissipates energy, but it also happens to raise the estrogen levels, which seem to affect the bones. Alcohol raises estrogen levels. So for a person who wants to restore their bones, no alcohol, no stimulants like coffee, very little sugar, no vigorous, super vigorous exercise like aerobic exercise, high amounts. I mean, you could take walks, but you don't want to do 10-mile walks, because again, you have to rebuild the energy. Moderate exercise, any kind of exercise is good, but there's a dirty word that people don't usually associate with health. It's a dirty word today. Moderation. So moderation in exercise is best, moderation in lifestyle to rebuild the bones. And the bones themselves to rebuild take the most patience. I do highly recommend a very high quality Qigong practice that correctly opens the body and also reverses and builds the kidney energy. And there are many exercises that focus on building kidney energy. Now, the last thing I'll just do honorable mention, I have some classes that talk about depression in much more detail, but depression is interesting because somatic pioneers, somatic really means body, but somatic pioneers from the 30s, I'm reading a book from a woman who taught in the 30s and wrote this book in the 40s, Mabel Todd. She made the connection, as they did in ancient China and other civilizations, between your emotions and your posture. So that when the person is depressed, we all know the posture. We've actually seen it. We may have experienced it. It's this, right? No, no, it's like that. So it's a compression of the lungs. So the misunderstanding about the depression is that it's a lack of serotonin, the brain chemical serotonin. But this doesn't make sense because serotonin goes up at times when depression is more prone. So it peaks at midnight. It peaks in the winter. So where people get seasonal depression very easily, at night is time when it starts to go up, the serotonin goes up. So it's not serotonin. Serotonin is, you might say, the kind of relaxing, it's needed, but it relaxes your body. The opposite of that is something called the catecholamines. The catecholamines is often exhausted in depression, along with the body posture and the depression of the lungs. So when the posture is going like this, what's happening is the muscles in the front of the body, because of years of being stressed, again, the energy equation is off. What's coming in, what's going out doesn't match. Too much out, not enough in, not enough nutrients in. Or too many toxins that the body can't handle, and there's ways to get the body to get rid of toxins. Poor exercise, like people do vigorous exercise, and this puts the body in stress too much. Many, many things will lead to depression. As the body gets exhausted, what happens is it starts to go into this, what Hannah calls the red light reflex. The red light reflex is it's a natural response. The opposite is the green light reflex. The green light reflex is your body engaging the muscles. When you're walking, when you're moving, when you're doing something in life, you engage your back muscles. And then when you say stop, that's enough, the muscles in the front engage. This is a natural process and healthy and should happen. But the problem is one becomes overactive or the other becomes overactive. When the back muscle becomes overactive, it starts to make the body over-energized. In the Oriental tradition, they say you become too young, overactivated. Food, lifestyle, many things can do that. When the body says stop, you start to compress. The muscles in the front become overactivated and tight to stop you from overworking, overdoing. But what happens is the lungs compress. As the lungs compress, estrogen goes even higher, lungs depress, the body's in a stress mode. So to counter depression, many of the same things we're talking about, you have to balance the energy equation, you have to strengthen digestion. There's a link in Oriental medicine that they made between digestion and lungs, which I found to be true. So that when the digestion is strong, the lungs start to function better. At the same time, you need to open up the front of the body and the lungs to counter the depression. Certain activities also will raise the catecholamines, and certain foods will raise the catecholamines, which counter depression. Foods that raise the catecholamines, including some fatty fish, like sardines or salmon, eggs that are naturally raised, truly free-range eggs, is very high in an amino acid that helps the counter depression called tyrosine. but it also is energizing. Natural red meat also is high in tyrosine that counters depression. Foods that create more serotonin should be limited, so you have to be careful not to overeat sugars, not to overeat flour products, not to overeat dairy products, especially milk or yogurt. They tend to produce more serotonin in the body, and this creates more depression. So now the interesting thing with exercise, many years ago when I was teaching a Qigong class, I had a insight, one of those aha moments about the exercise. And because I was doing these exercises, I've been studying them for the last now more than 15 years with different teachers and people. And I was doing this exercise that we were showing yesterday for people who were in the class. And it's this exercise where there's two exercises. One exercise that you open up the chest. The other exercise that opens up the top of the shoulders and stretches the body. And when you do these exercises very slow, and over time, you start to feel your chest becomes more open. And then, the bodywork pioneers found this was true, and I found it's absolutely true, is it's very hard to get depressed when the chest is open. Because if the chest is open and you get depressed, what does it look like? Comedy, right? So it doesn't fit. Or if I did the opposite, I'm like this, and it looks like I'm a crazy person, right? Disturbed, right, person. So the body, you can change also the emotions through the body, but also you need to change diet and lifestyle because you don't want to fight yourself. Like if your diet is putting you in stress, one of the things that, besides overeating, for instance, if you're eating too many calories and your body's overweight, it puts the body in stress to hold the weight. There's one consistent way to lose weight, which many people don't exactly like to do, but you calculate how many calories supports your current weight, and you eat 400 calories less. That's it. That's the formula. Of course, by that, you have to have an understanding of what's in food. How many calories, the general understanding, you have to develop that and understand, because that'll put the body in stress. If you don't get out of stress, it'll have that. So you have to calculate it then. But if you go on a severely calorie restrict diet, it also does something else. It doesn't put your body into a starvation mode. That's been found to be a myth. I used to think that, and it made sense to me, but I looked at a lot of the research, and there's no such thing as the starvation mode. They quote, so I countered my understanding of this because the people used to quote the Minnesota study starvation experiment where the man's metabolism dropped, and then they stopped losing weight. They stopped losing weight because if they lost any more weight, they were going to die. so they definitely lost weight. So the starvation mode seems to be quite a myth, but there is something else called the starvation response. And that is, you can have a response to restricting your calories. Even some people will restrict their calories 300 or 400 calories. They have a starvation response. And what happens with that, you get depressed because you go into stress. Your body doesn't function. You don't digest. You can't think. You can't move. So there's different ways to counter the starvation response. Some people get it even when they restrict their calories a little bit. So one of them is to every few weeks forget about restricting your calories. Every few months have a week off of restricting your calories at all, because real healthy weight loss is basically something like 1/2 to 2 pounds a week. So if you have a lot to lose, it's a long-term project where you have to discipline yourself to do that, but you have to take some breaks. If you take a break every week, you might make up for your whole week, so you can't do it every week. But you do have to take some breaks occasionally. That makes sense. Came across this information where somebody works with people. Every few months you take a week off, or every few weeks you take a day off, because weight will put the body in a stress mode too. So that you could count. There's many ways that you can counter depression. Now, one thing I should mention about depression before I open some questions is interesting, is that the drugs that people are put on to counter depression usually only work temporarily. The drugs that are known to keep serotonin in the brain, they actually temporarily boost these other brain chemicals called the catecholamines. So that's why when people go on antidepressants, originally they feel better. But it's not because of the serotonin in their brain. It's because they're boosting these other brain chemicals. That's a side effect of many of those drugs that keep serotonin in the brain. The serotonin reuptake inhibitors, as they call them. So, and then there is a one that's given, it has an interesting name called Wellbutrin. It sounds like a comedy routine, Wellbutrin. But that is a stimulant to the catecholamines. And the stimulant to the catecholamines eventually burns out the catecholamines. So you have to be careful with stimulants that will do that. Natural stimulants, natural ways to stimulate the catecholamines is to do some moderate vigorous exercise, not long distance exercise, something moderate, vigorously, like taking a brisk walk for 10, 15 minutes every day, and getting out in the sun. So this stimulates the catecholamines to help counter the depression. And so the interesting thing is that I've worked with people who have depression, some clinical, some minor depression, and they often came to me for some other problem because the depression wasn't the major issue. They had many other problems, and then they told me, that I'm not depressed anymore. Is this something that can happen? They were very surprised. Well, the whole body works together. So you have to make the energy of the body function well. In the Qigong tradition and the Oriental medicine tradition, they say you want to restore what's called true human energy. True human energy is true vitality. Today we have a lot of false vitality. We run on stress hormones, which burns out the body. We run on stimulants. We run on high sugar diets. We run on high fat diets. We run on things that overstimulate the body. People eat too much meat. People run in the stress mode because they're not eating enough of nutrients. And this would be a kind of false energy. But what we really want to foster to counter problems for women, in this case, today's class, is true human energy. And so it's not a quick fix. It requires people learning how to eat a way that supports the body, what they called in Asia the clear light diet. Understanding the energy nature of food, so you know which foods are building the blood, which foods are building the body, which foods are energizing the body, how to balance your body. It requires a study and learning and understanding of lifestyle and how it affects you and what is the healthiest lifestyle. What's the healthiest exercises? Exercises that are energizing for the body. In my study of Qigong over the last 50 years and energy exercises over the last 40 years, I found that all of what I learned from different people have germs of truth, but some have more truth than others. And so there is a way to understand the energy exercise and go deeper and deeper and layer that. And when you go to the deepest layer, it's called Nejia, which is the internal family, or internal energy practices. So a lot of these are still practices, and quiet and slow moving practices and holding practices. But for most people, it's easier to do the moving practices because the moving practices activate your lungs and your digestive system to restore those functions. And once those functions are restored, then it's possible to build deep energy and restore your body on a deeper level, which is needed for people who are very sick with things like cancer or osteoporosis or many other illnesses. Okay, so any questions before we finish up about today?
This specifically food about to help more healthy breast, like some general food which is good.
Okay, so the question is about, is there healthy foods to help the breast? Well, the breast is an extension of your body. So what helps the breast basically is making sure that you are producing energy from the food you're eating so that energy is circulating and the body's not in stress. So one of the foods that support the liver are foods that help the breast, particularly. But as part of a healthy diet of cooked grains and vegetables, moderate, regular natural animal foods, some sweets, some moderate fruits and seasonings, a whole range of diets, You can get an idea of this by looking at my website and the full spectrum macrobiotic eating. But the foods that support liver health are things like barley, particularly if someone needs to lose weight, a barley called hato mugi, which is a wild type of barley called also Job's tears. Other foods that support the liver is the very moderate amounts of the sour flavor. Moderate amounts. Excessive amounts of the sour flavor will tighten the body, but small amounts of the sour flavor support the liver energy. To understand the liver function in Oriental medicine, the liver function is energetically wider than just the physical liver, though it's connected. It's the smooth circulation of energy, blood, lymph, thoughts, ideas, and emotions. When the body is tight or tense, and many people have muscle contraction over their whole body that has to be reversed, then you don't have the smooth flow of energy to the breast also. So the foods, also foods that help the stimulation of the circulation throughout the body are mild spices like ginger, garlic, basil, oregano. This has a mild stimulating effect. Vegetables that go upward, like leafy greens, leeks, scallions, upward growing vegetables. And for women seem to need some sweets regularly to help the circulation and help the body relax and get out of the stress mode, even more than men. Men could use some too, but women need moderate sweets. So moderate sweets would be things like rice syrup, barley malt, stronger sweet is maple syrup, cooked fruit, some dried fruit, especially temperate fruits would be best. Some moderate sweets. If you can find a good quality sweet drink called amasaki, that could be used as a sweetener. Desserts could be made either like they have here, made out of agar called Canton, or made from natural gelatin powder to make your own Jell-O with some natural fruit juice and fruits. And also women seem to need, compared to men, women do better with regular but small amounts of like soft dairy products, like things like yogurt, raw milk if it's available, or some creams, but it's not necessary to avoid these if someone needs to lose weight. They just have to count them because they're richer foods. Count them in moderate amounts. And if you need to gain weight, then gaining weight, remember, is not only calories, because you are what you digest. But the thing is that often people will need more calories and have to increase their calories. For instance, if the mind, I'm working with someone who is having problems eating because their mind is too active, and that's stopping their digestion. The mind affects digestion. Okay, any last question? I'm going to finish up, I think.
One more, I'm sorry.
Right, sure.
Now is revolutionary, like bone broth.
Bone broth, right.
That's really, really healthy.
So the question is, bone broth really healthy? And the answer is yes. So, bone broth has many, many benefits. And some cultures didn't eat much animal food, but they had a lot of bone broth. And what happens is there's a component in the bone broth, the gelatin component, which is protein sparing. So, for instance, in Vietnam and also in rural China, they wouldn't eat high amounts of animal food. They'd have often soup, and they'd get a small amount, but it always was cooked with the bones. So then the bone broth, along with having adequate calories, those two things are protein sparing. So they would stay quite healthy on a moderate protein diet of animal proteins because of the bone broth. So it's a very healthy food, and traditionally many cultures had bone broth every day, or they had foods with bones every day that they'd eat. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming.
Vegetarian doesn't work good, vegetarian broth.
Vegetarian, well, the last question is just to finish up, is some of the same, there is glycine, which is a component of the bone broth, in kombu. So in a kombu broth, you can get some benefits of the bone broth, not all the benefits, but some benefits. So I think that's one of the reasons why in Japan they call dashi was so important. It's in many foods, like in places like here, like Soen. We have many of the sauces and dressings and things have as a base the kombu dashi. And so people are getting the glycine, which is one of the amino acids that is protein sparing and very beneficial for the body. And if a person was purely vegetarian, the glycine. Now I've had some people who are purely vegetarian who agreed to have bone broth or agreed to have gelatin powder because they felt it really helped them. So they made an allowance to their vegetarian eating and just had either gelatin powder or bone broth, and felt really good for that.
The gelatin is made from what?
You could get a very good gelatin powder from Amazon. It's the Great Lakes gelatin powder. Okay, so thank you very much.